My name is Elena Vargas. I'm 29 years old. And last Tuesday morning, I sat in the mahogany-paneled courtroom of the Metropolitan District Court, surrounded by the cold gleam of marble walls and the weight of judgmental stairs. The morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the gallery, where my family sat like a tribunal of disappointment. My father, Victor, adjusted his platinum cufflinks. My mother, Marisol, smoothed her cream Chanel suit with nervous precision. My older brother, Diego, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, wearing that smug expression I'd known since childhood. At the defendant's table, I sat quietly beside my lawyer, Amelia Reed. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek bun, her navy suit impeccable, her expression unreadable. She told me to trust her, to stay silent no matter what they said. So I waited, hands folded, while whispers rippled through the gallery like wind through wheat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Judge Harrison, a stern man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, called for order with a sharp rap of his gavel. The case was a business dispute, something that should have been resolved quietly between lawyers. But my family had made it personal. They always did. Mr. Collins, the opposing counsel, stood first. He was everything I expected from a lawyer hired to humiliate rather than simply win. Expensive suit, practiced sneer, the kind of man who mistook cruelty for cleverness. He gestured toward me with theatrical disdain. "Your Honor," Collins began, his voice carrying across the courtroom like a blade. "We're dealing with someone who has contributed nothing of value to society. Miss Vargas has no significant assets, no meaningful career, no accomplishments worth mentioning. She is, quite frankly, exactly what her own family has described her as, a burden." Heat rose in my chest, but I kept my face still. Amelia's hand brushed mine under the table, a silent reminder, not yet. Collins continued, pulling out a folder thick with documents. "The financial records speak for themselves. Miss Vargas lives modestly, works sporadically, and has never shown any evidence of business acumen or financial responsibility. She is entirely dependent on the goodwill of others." That's when my father stood. Victor Vargas commanded attention without trying. At 62, he still carried himself like the self-made man who'd built Vargas Holdings from a single construction contract into a multi-million-dollar empire. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his Italian shoes gleamed, and when he spoke, people listened. "Your Honor," Victor said, his voice steady and cold, "I want to be clear about something. I've spent 30 years building a legacy, creating jobs, and contributing to this city's growth. I've raised a son who followed in my footsteps, who understands responsibility and success." His eyes found mine across the courtroom, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something softer there, some flicker of the father who used to read me bedtime stories before the world taught him to value profit over people. Then his expression hardened. He continued, each word deliberate and cutting, "But I also have a daughter who has been nothing but a disappointment from the day she decided that dreams were more important than duty. You want to know what Elena Vargas represents? She represents every choice I'm ashamed of, every moment I failed as a father to instill proper values." The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter's fingers stilled on her keys. "She is," Victor said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "the biggest disgrace this family has ever known." Gasps echoed through the gallery. I felt the stares of strangers boring into me, their pity and judgment wrapped together. My mother's face went pale, but she said nothing. She never did. Diego shook his head slowly, as if confirming a long-held truth. The words hit like physical blows. 30 years of quiet disappointment, whispered criticisms, and polite dismissals crystallized into that single, devastating sentence, the biggest disgrace this family has ever known. But I didn't break. I'd learned long ago that the Vargas family mistook silence for weakness, stillness for surrender. What they never understood was that some of us grew stronger in the shadows they cast. Judge Harrison frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the personal nature of the attack. "Mr. Vargas, please confine your comments to matters relevant to the case." Collins smiled like a shark scenting blood. "Your Honor, I believe this speaks directly to the credibility and character of the defendant. When her own family cannot vouch for her integrity or competence, what does that tell us about her claims in this matter?" Beside me, Amelia remained perfectly still, but I caught her slight lift of her eyebrow, the way her fingers drummed once on her legal pad. She was a chess player, and this was her favorite part of the game, watching opponents overplay their hand. "Mr. Collins," she said, finally, rising with fluid grace, "I think you'll find that assumptions about my client's character and capabilities may be appropriate." Something in her tone made the opposing lawyer pause, but the damage seemed done. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. My family sat satisfied, as if justice had already been served. Victor adjusted his tie with the air of a man who just completed an unpleasant but necessary task. They thought they'd won. They thought this public humiliation would finally break me, force me to crawl back to them seeking forgiveness and acceptance. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that their rejection had been the fire that forged me. Every dismissive comment, every rolled eye, every time they'd introduced me as, "Elena, she does something with computers," had pushed me further from needing their approval and closer to building something they couldn't comprehend or control. But to understand how I'd reached this moment, sitting in that courtroom while my own father called me a disgrace, you need to know how it all began. You need to see the little girl who first learned that love in the Vargas family was conditional, that acceptance came with a price I was never willing to pay. The Vargas mansion sat on 3 acres of manicured lawn in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. Georgian columns framed the entrance, crystal chandeliers hung in every room, and oil paintings of stern ancestors watched from gilded frames. It was the kind of house featured in architectural magazines, where every surface gleamed and every corner spoke of old money and older expectations. I was 7 years old when I first understood I didn't belong there. It was a Saturday morning in late spring. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the breakfast room, casting geometric patterns across the Persian rug. Diego, then 11, sat at the head of the smaller table, reading the financial section of the newspaper like a miniature businessman. He'd already dressed in the polo shirt and khakis that would become his uniform, preppy, polished, proper. I'd come down in paint-stained overalls and a backwards baseball cap, clutching a sketchbook filled with drawings of robots and spaceships and the kind of wild inventions that lived in my imagination. "Look what I made, Papa," I said, climbing onto the chair beside Victor's. My father was reading his tablet, scrolling through emails with the focused intensity he brought to everything. I spread my sketchbook open to a page where I'd drawn a computer that could talk to animals. Victor glanced down, his expression shifting from indulgence to mild irritation. "Elena, what is this?" "It's an invention," I explained eagerly. "See, the computer has special microphones that can understand what dogs and cats are saying, and then it translates it so we can talk to them. And this button here makes it so the animals can understand us too." Diego snorted.
That's stupid. Animals can't talk. They can, I insisted, my voice rising with the passion only children possess. We just don't know their language yet, but a computer could learn it if we taught it right. Victor closed his tablet with a sharp click. Elena, you're 7 years old. Instead of drawing impossible nonsense, you should be learning about real things. Business, mathematics, skills that will actually matter when you grow up. The words stung, but I pressed on. But, Papa, computers are real, and someday they might be smart enough to... Enough! His voice cut through my explanation like ice. This is exactly the kind of foolishness I won't tolerate. Diego, show your sister what productive use of time looks like. My brother straightened with visible pride, pulling out a composition notebook filled with neat columns of numbers. I've been tracking the stock prices of all the companies in Papa's portfolio. Look, I can show you which ones gained value this week and calculate the percentage increases. Victor's face transformed. The stern mask melted into something warm and approving, the expression I'd been trying to earn with my drawings. Excellent work, son. This is how a Vargas child should spend their time, learning the tools they'll need to succeed. He ruffled Diego's hair affectionately, then turned to me. Elena, I want you to put away these silly drawings and start learning from your brother. No more wasting time on fantasies. I clutched my sketchbook tighter. But I like drawing and thinking about how things could work better. Like, what you want doesn't matter here, Victor said, firmly. What matters is preparing yourself for the real world. The Vargas family doesn't produce dreamers, Elena. We produce leaders. My mother, Marisol, chose that moment to glide into the breakfast room, her silk robe flowing behind her like she was performing for an invisible camera. Even at 7, I understood that my mother treated life like a stage where she was always the elegant leading lady. What's all this discussion about? She asked, pouring herself coffee from the silver service. Elena's been wasting time on these ridiculous drawings again, Victor said, gesturing dismissively at my sketchbook. Marisol glanced at my artwork with the polite smile she reserved for unpleasant social obligations. Oh, sweetheart, those are very colorful. But your father's right. Young ladies from good families focus on more appropriate pursuits. Perhaps we should enroll you in piano lessons or French.
I don't want piano lessons, I said quietly. I want to learn about computers. The silence that followed felt heavier than the crystal chandelier hanging above us. Diego rolled his eyes, Victor's jaw tightened, Marisol's smile became strained. Elena, my father said finally, each word measured and cold, you are 7 years old. You don't know what you want. We know what's best for you. And what's best is learning to be a proper young lady who can contribute meaningfully to this family's success. He stood, straightening his tie in the automatic gesture that meant the conversation was over. I don't want to see any more of these drawings. Is that understood? I nodded, but inside, something small and fierce was taking root. The same stubborn streak that would later drive me to spend sleepless nights learning code, that would push me through rejection after rejection until I built something that couldn't be dismissed or diminished. But at 7, all I could do was close my sketchbook and watch my father lavish praise on Diego for memorizing stock prices, while my dreams of talking animal computers were relegated to foolish fantasies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. That afternoon, while Diego practiced his golf swing with Victor's approval echoing across the lawn, I snuck up to my room and kept drawing. But this time, I drew quietly, secretly, learning the first lesson that would define my relationship with my family. The things that mattered to me would have to matter in silence. I drew computers that could cure diseases and robots that could explore other planets. I drew inventions that could make the world better, kinder, more connected. And with each sketch, the gap between who I was and who they wanted me to be grew a little wider. Years later, sitting in that courtroom while my father called me a disgrace, I would remember that breakfast room conversation.
how the same man who dismissed my childhood dreams as worthless nonsense was now dismissing my adult achievements with equal certainty. What he'd never understood was that every time he'd told me to stop dreaming, I'd simply learn to dream louder, just quietly enough that he couldn't hear me. By the time I turned 16, the dynamics in the Vargas household had crystallized into something as predictable as sunrise. Diego was the sun around which our family's pride orbited, and I was a distant moon, present but largely invisible, noticed only when I wandered too close to the light. The night that made this painfully clear was Diego's high school graduation party. Marisol had transformed our backyard into something from a magazine spread. White tents with crystal chandeliers, round tables draped in cream linen, servers in crisped uniforms carrying champagne flutes and artfully arranged canapes. 200 guests mingled on the lawn, their laughter mixing with the sound of a string quartet. Diego, 18 and golden in his perfectly tailored navy suit, moved through the crowd like he'd been born for moments like this. Harvard acceptance letter in hand, early admission, naturally, he'd already been featured in the society pages as young man to watch and the next generation of Vargas excellence. I stood at the edge of the celebration wearing a simple black dress that Marisol had chosen because it was appropriately modest and wouldn't draw attention. My hair was pulled back severely, my makeup minimal. I was meant to be part of the elegant backdrop, not a focal point. "Elena, darling, you look lovely," Aunt Carmen said, approaching with her usual air of well-meaning condescension. She was my mother's sister, the kind of woman who measured worth in carats and connections. "And what are your plans after graduation? Following Diego's footsteps to an Ivy League school?" Before I could answer, Victor's voice boomed across the lawn. He stood beneath the main tent, champagne glass raised, commanding attention with the natural authority that had built his empire. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, and the crowd quieted immediately. "Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate not just Diego's graduation, but the beginning of what I know will be an extraordinary journey." Applause rippled through the guests. Diego beamed, accepting congratulations and handshakes with the practiced grace of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. Victor continued, his voice carrying pride like a banner. "When I look at my son, I see everything this family represents. Excellence, ambition, the understanding that success isn't given, it's earned through dedication and the right choices." More applause. I found myself clapping too, automatically, while something cold settled in my chest. "Harvard Law School will be lucky to have him," Victor declared, "and I have no doubt that Diego will return to us ready to take Vargas Holdings into the next generation. Our legacy is secure."
The crowd erupted in cheers. Diego stepped forward, embracing Victor with the easy affection of a favorite son. Marisol dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her smile radiant. And then Victor's gaze found mine across the lawn. For a moment, I thought he might acknowledge me too. Maybe mention that he had another child, another source of pride. Maybe find something, anything, worth celebrating about the daughter who'd spent 4 years maintaining a 4.0 GPA while teaching herself programming languages and building websites for local nonprofits in her spare time. Instead, he paused, his expression shifting to something I'd learned to recognize, disappointment mixed with resignation. "Of course," Victor continued, "not every young person understands the value of following a proven path to success. Some prefer to chase other interests." The words hung in the air like smoke. A few guests glanced in my direction, their expressions ranging from pity to confusion. Aunt Carmen's smile became strained. Marisol stepped forward smoothly, her social radar detecting potential embarrassment. "Victor, perhaps we should..." But he wasn't finished. "My daughter Elena will be starting her senior year soon. She's exploring her options. Hopefully, she'll come to understand that dreams are luxuries that practical people can't afford." Heat flooded my face. 200 people were now looking at me with varying degrees of sympathy and judgment, and I wanted nothing more than to disappear into the perfectly manicured hedges. But something else stirred inside me too. The same stubborn flame that had kept me drawing in secret,
that had driven me to learn HTML and CSS from library books when my parents refused to buy me computer programming texts. Actually, I heard myself saying, my voice carrying farther than I'd intended, I've already decided on my path. The party guests turned toward me with renewed interest. Victor's eyebrows rose. Diego's confident smile flickered slightly. I took a breath, drawing strength from the certainty I'd been building in silence for years. I'm planning to study computer science. I've already been accepted to MIT's early admission program. The silence that followed felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. Victor's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. Marisol's fan is still in her hand. Even the string quartet seemed to falter. Computer science? Victor repeated, as if I'd announced my intention to join the circus. Yes, I said, my voice growing stronger. I want to build software that can help people, maybe work on artificial intelligence or develop applications that can solve real problems. I've already created 3 websites for local charities, and one of them increased their donations by 40% after I redesigned their online presence. A few murmurs of interest rippled through the crowd, but Victor's face was darkening with each word. Elena, he said, his voice low and dangerous, this is neither the time nor the place for your fantasies. They're not fantasies, Papa. I've been... Enough. The word cracked like a whip across the lawn. You're embarrassing yourself and this family with this nonsense. Computer science? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. What kind of career is that for Vargas? What kind of legacy does that build? Diego stepped forward, his Harvard confidence intact. Elena, be realistic. You can't just decide you're going to be some kind of computer programmer. That's not a serious profession for someone from our family. Why not? I asked, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. Because it doesn't involve wearing suits and making deals? Because it doesn't fit your definition of success? Marisol moved closer, her smile strained. Darling, perhaps we could discuss this privately. But no, Victor interrupted. Let her learn this lesson now, in front of everyone. Elena, you will not be studying computer science. You will choose a respectable major, business, perhaps, or economics, and you'll prepare yourself to contribute meaningfully to this family's enterprises. This conversation is over. The party guests shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others watching with the fascination people reserve for public family meltdowns. But I didn't back down. Not this time. The conversation is over when I say it's over. And I say that I'm going to MIT. I'm going to study computer science. I'm going to build something that matters, even if it doesn't matter to you. Victor's face went white with rage. You ungrateful...
Victor, Marisol whispered urgently, the guests. He looked around, suddenly remembering his audience. The man who'd built his reputation on control and dignity was losing both in front of 200 of the city's most influential people. We'll continue this discussion inside, he said through gritted teeth. But the damage was done. The perfect celebration had cracked, and through that crack, everyone had glimpsed the truth. The Vargas family's golden son had a sister, and that sister had dreams that threatened their carefully constructed narrative. As the party slowly resumed its rhythm, I stood there realizing that I'd just crossed a line there was no coming back from. I'd chosen my path over their approval, my truth over their comfortable lies. It would be 13 years before I saw them again. In that courtroom where Victor would call me a disgrace in front of strangers, never knowing that the daughter he'd dismissed had built an empire in the shadows of his scorn. But that night at Diego's graduation party, all I knew was that I'd finally stopped trying to earn love from people who'd confused control with caring, success with worth, compliance with family loyalty. I'd chosen to become whoever I was meant to be, with or without their blessing. And for the first time in my life, that felt like victory. MIT was everything my family had warned me it wouldn't be. Difficult, demanding, and absolutely perfect for someone who'd spent her childhood being told her dreams were impossible.
But even with a full scholarship and a part-time job at a campus computer lab, money was tight. When I graduated at 22 with a degree in computer science and artificial intelligence, I had exactly $847 in my checking account and a head full of ideas that no one wanted to fund. My first apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up in Cambridge, 600 square feet of creaky floors and temperamental heating. The previous tenant had left behind a card table and 2 folding chairs, which became my office furniture. I bought a used laptop from a pawn shop and convinced the landlord to include the internet in the rent. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first space I'd ever had where no one could tell me my dreams were worthless. The job hunt was brutal. Silicon Valley startups wanted experienced programmers, not fresh graduates with brilliant ideas but no track record. Boston tech companies were more traditional, looking for candidates who'd fit neatly into corporate hierarchies. After 3 months of rejection letters, I took a job at TechFlow Solutions, a mid-sized company that built inventory management software for retail chains. It paid enough to cover rent and ramen noodles, but my real work happened after midnight. Every night I'd come home from 8 hours of debugging other people's uninspired code, heat up leftover Chinese food, and settle in at my card table with my laptop and a growing collection of empty coffee cups. The building was old enough that the walls were thin, and I could hear Mrs. Chen upstairs watching Korean dramas, the couple next door arguing about money, the college students below playing video games until dawn. But when I opened my laptop and started coding, the world narrowed to just the screen and the problem I was trying to solve. I was building something I called Connect Local, a platform that would help small businesses create professional websites and online stores without needing to hire expensive developers. The idea had come from watching my college friends struggle to promote their startups, and from remembering all the local charities I'd helped in high school who couldn't afford proper web design. The work was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. I'd spend hours wrestling with database architecture, then breakthrough moments would hit at 3 a.m. when I finally cracked a particularly stubborn algorithm. My laptop's keyboard developed worn spots on the most used keys. I learned to code with one hand while eating with the other, surviving on a rotation of pizza, Chinese takeout, and whatever frozen meals were on sale. Progress was measured in tiny victories. The login system finally worked, the payment processing integrated correctly, the user interface stopped looking like it had been designed by someone who'd never seen a website before. Each small success felt like proof that I was building something real, something valuable, even if no one else could see it yet. 6 months in, I started reaching out to potential investors. The rejection emails came back like clockwork, form letters that barely seemed to acknowledge what I'd built. Not a good fit for our portfolio, looking for more established teams, interesting concept, but we're focusing on different sectors. The worst ones didn't even respond. One particularly brutal week, I received 7 rejections in 5 days. I was sitting at my card table at 2 a.m. staring at the latest thanks but no thanks email when I seriously considered calling my parents for the first time in 2 years. Maybe Victor had been right. Maybe I was chasing impossible fantasies while practical people built real careers. That's when a message popped up in the coding forum where I'd been asking technical questions about scalability. The username was DevMentor47, and they'd been quietly helpful over the past few months, offering solutions to problems I couldn't solve alone. Saw your latest update on the Connect Local project, the message read. Don't know if you're looking for feedback, but I've been following your progress. What you're building could change how small businesses think about their online presence. Keep going. The world needs more builders like you.
I stared at the screen for a long time. This stranger, someone I had never met who knew me only through lines of code and frustrated forum posts, saw value in what I was creating. They understood what I was trying to build in a way that venture capitalists with Harvard MBAs couldn't. I wrote back, "Thank you. Some days it feels like I'm screaming into the void." Their response came quickly. Every revolutionary idea starts in someone's quiet room at 2 a.m. The void is listening, even when it doesn't answer back. That message became my anchor during the hardest months. When the rejections piled up, when my laptop crashed and I had to spend 3 days rebuilding corrupted files, when I questioned whether I was wasting my life on a dream that would never pay the bills, I'd remember those words. The void is listening. I printed out the message and taped it above my card table desk. Every night, as I worked by the light of a single desk lamp while the rest of the city slept, I held on to the idea that somewhere out there, someone believed in what I was building. I didn't know it then, but Dev Mentor 47 was actually Sarah Kim, a senior developer at Google who would later become one of my first major clients. But even if I'd known, it wouldn't have mattered. What mattered was the simple truth that someone had seen my work and recognized its potential. That kept me going through 18-hour days and rejection after rejection. It kept me coding when my savings account hit double digits and I started donating plasma to buy groceries. It kept me building when my family's silence stretched into its 3rd year, when birthdays and holidays passed without a single phone call from the people who'd once claimed to love me. In those quiet Cambridge nights, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the glow of my laptop screen, I learned something my family had never understood. The most powerful things are often built in silence by people who believe in tomorrow more than they fear today's rejection. I was 23 years old, living on ramen and stubbornness, but I was building something that would eventually change everything. I just didn't know it yet. The memory of those late Cambridge nights faded as Mr. Collins's voice cut through the courtroom, sharp with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. "Your Honor, the financial records speak for themselves," he announced, pulling a thick manila folder from his briefcase with theatrical precision. "Miss Elena Vargas has no significant assets, no substantial income, no business interests worth mentioning. She is, by any reasonable measure, entirely dependent on the goodwill of others." He spread documents across his table like a dealer laying out a winning hand. Bank statements, tax returns, employment records, all carefully selected to paint a picture of someone living paycheck to paycheck, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely inaccurate. Elena Vargas, whose name appeared on those documents, did indeed work part-time as a freelance web designer, did indeed live in a modest apartment, did indeed drive a 7-year-old Honda Civic. What those documents didn't show, what Collins couldn't possibly know, was that the woman sitting at the defendant's table was also the anonymous founder of a technology empire worth more than his entire law firm would see in a decade. "These records," Collins continued, his voice dripping with disdain, "reveal a pattern of financial instability and lack of ambition that speaks directly to Miss Vargas's character. No meaningful career progression, no significant investments, no evidence of the business acumen that runs in her family." Victor sat in the gallery behind Collins, his expression a careful mask of disappointed resignation. But I caught the slight nod of satisfaction, the way his shoulders relaxed as if a burden had been lifted. Finally, someone was saying what he had always believed, that his daughter was exactly the failure he had always known her to be. Diego leaned forward slightly, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his Harvard law training evident in how he took notes on everything Collins said. He was already planning how to use this information later, how to leverage my public humiliation into some advantage for the family business. My brother had always been good at turning other people's pain into profit. Marisol dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the part of the grieving mother whose daughter had disappointed her beyond measure. But her tears were performed, not felt, the kind of emotional display she'd perfected at charity galas and society luncheons. "Furthermore," Colin pressed on, warming to his theme, "we have testimony from family members confirming Miss Vargas's complete lack of responsibility or contribution to the family enterprises. Her own father, a respected businessman, has publicly acknowledged his daughter's failures." Judge Harrison frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the personal nature of the attack. "Mr. Collins, please confine your arguments to matters directly relevant to the case at hand." "Of course, Your Honor. I simply want to establish that Miss Vargas lacks both the means and the credibility to pursue her frivolous claims against my clients. When someone has never demonstrated any capacity for success or responsibility, the court must question their motivations." Beside me, Amelia remained perfectly still, her hands folded calmly on her legal pad, but I knew her well enough by now to recognize the signs.
the way her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the slight drumming of her index finger against her pen. She was a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and Collins was giving her everything she needed.
Your Honor, Collins continued, emboldened by the silence from our table, I move that this case be dismissed on the grounds that the plaintiff lacks both standing and credibility. Miss Vargas has brought these claims purely out of spite and desperation, hoping to extract some settlement from my clients rather than face the consequences of her own poor choices. A murmur rippled through the courtroom gallery. Several reporters scribbled notes, already composing headlines about the Vargas family disgrace who'd tried and failed to win easy money through the courts. That's when Amelia finally moved. She rose slowly, with the fluid grace of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Her navy suit was impeccable, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun that suggested both professionalism and barely contained power. When she spoke, her voice carried across the courtroom with quiet authority. Your Honor, Mr. Collins seems to have confused financial records with the full picture of someone's worth and capabilities. If the court would indulge me, I believe we can provide a more complete understanding of my client's position. Collins's confidence flickered slightly. Your Honor, we've presented extensive documentation. Documentation that tells only part of the story, Amelia interrupted smoothly. Mr. Collins has shown the court records for Elena Vargas, freelance web designer. But I wonder if he's familiar with the business activities of Phantom Technologies, LLC. The name meant nothing to Collins, but I saw Victor's eyebrows furrow slightly. He'd heard that company name before, probably in business journals or industry reports, but couldn't quite place it. Your Honor, Collins said, his voice rising with irritation, I'm not sure what relevance some random technology company has to these proceedings. Amelia's smile was sharp as a blade. Random? Mr. Collins, Phantom Technologies was recently valued at $1.2 billion. They've revolutionized small business e-commerce, created over 15,000 jobs, and their anonymous founder was featured on the cover of Forbes as one of the most influential entrepreneurs of the decade. The courtroom stirred. Collins looked confused. Victor looked intrigued, and Diego's pen stopped moving across his notepad. Again, Collins said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. I fail to see the relevance. The relevance, Mr. Collins, is that you've spent the last hour painting my client as someone without means, ambition, or business acumen. But you've based that assessment on incomplete information. Amelia paused, letting the tension build. Perhaps we should examine the complete picture before we make any hasty judgments about Miss Vargas's capabilities. I felt the shift in the room's energy like a change in atmospheric pressure. Collins was still confident, but doubt had crept into his expression. Victor was leaning forward now, his business instincts recognizing that something important was happening even if he couldn't identify what. Judge Harrison looked between the two lawyers with growing interest. Ms. Reed, if you have evidence that contradicts the financial records presented, please share it with the court. I will, Your Honor. But first, I think Mr. Collins deserves the opportunity to revise his assessment of my client's character and capabilities, given that new information may come to light. The challenge hung in the air between them. Collins could sense the trap closing around him, but he'd already committed too deeply to his narrative of Elena as a failure to back down now. Your Honor, he said, straightening his shoulders, whatever Ms. Reed thinks she can produce, the facts remain clear. Elena Vargas is not a successful businesswoman. She's not an innovator or entrepreneur. She's exactly what her own family has described, someone who has never contributed anything meaningful to society. Amelia nodded slowly, as if Collins had just given her a gift. Thank you, Mr. Collins. I wanted to be absolutely certain of your position before we proceed. She turned to the judge with the kind of smile that made opposing counsels nervous. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to present evidence that may require Mr. Collins to
reconsider his characterization of my client. The courtroom held its breath. In the gallery, my family sat frozen, sensing that the comfortable narrative of Elena the Disgrace was about to be challenged in ways they couldn't anticipate or control. But I knew what was coming. Amelia had warned me this moment would arrive, when years of careful secrecy would finally give way to the truth. The question wasn't whether Collins would be forced to eat his words. It was whether my family would be able to swallow what they were about to learn about the daughter they'd spent decades dismissing as worthless. The turning point came on a Tuesday in October, 3 years after I'd graduated from MIT. I was 25 years old, still living in that cramped at Cambridge apartment, still working at TechFlow during the day and coding my dreams into reality during the night. Connect Local had evolved from a simple website builder into something more sophisticated, a comprehensive platform that could handle inventory management, customer relationships, payment processing, and marketing automation for small businesses. But more importantly, it was finally working.
Not just the code, though I'd spent 18 months debugging every function until it ran like silk, but the business itself. Word was spreading through the small business community like wildfire. A bakery in Portland had tripled their online orders after launching their Connect Local site. A boutique in Austin had expanded from local sales to shipping nationwide. A nonprofit in Denver had raised more in 6 months than they'd managed in the previous 3 years combined. I'd been running the platform through a series of limited liability companies, keeping my personal name separate from the business, partly for privacy, partly because I'd learned that Elena Vargas, 25-year-old solo founder, didn't inspire the same confidence as Phantom Technologies, established tech company, but mostly because I wasn't ready for my family to discover what I'd built. Not yet. The morning that changed everything started like any other. I was at my card table desk reviewing user analytics over instant coffee and day-old donuts when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I'd learned to answer everything. You never knew when a potential client might call. Elena Vargas? The voice was crisp, professional, confident. This is Amelia Reed from Morrison Reed & Associates. I represent several technology companies, and I've been following the work coming out of Phantom Technologies. Do you have a few minutes to talk? My coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. Morrison Reed & Associates was one of Boston's most prestigious law firms, the kind of place that handled billion-dollar mergers and Fortune 500 legal affairs. What could they possibly want with my little operation? I'm sorry, I said carefully, but I think there might be some confusion. I don't work for Phantom Technologies. I'm just a freelance web designer. Amelia's laugh was warm, but knowing. Miss Vargas, I've done my homework. The incorporation documents for Phantom Technologies list E.M. Vargas as the sole member of the managing LLC. The trademark applications were filed from your apartment address, and unless I'm very much mistaken, the bank account receiving all those subscription payments is registered to Elena Maria Vargas, Social Security number ending in 4847. My heart stopped. Then I started again, racing. How did you... I'm very good at what I do, she said simply. The question is whether you're ready to stop hiding behind shell companies and start acting like the successful entrepreneur you actually are. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop in Harvard Square. Amelia Reed was nothing like what I'd expected from a high-powered attorney. She was maybe 35, with kind eyes and an easy smile that put me at ease immediately. But there was steel underneath the warmth. The kind of quiet confidence that came from winning cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. You've built something remarkable, she said, sliding a tablet across the table. The screen showed a comprehensive analysis of Phantom Technologies, revenue projections, market analysis, competitive landscape, growth potential. But you're at a crossroads. You can keep running this as a side project while you work at TechFlow, or you can take the leap and build what this could become. I stared at the numbers on her screen. The revenue projections made my head spin. These numbers, they can't be right. They're conservative, Amelia said. Based on your current growth rate and market penetration, Phantom Technologies could be worth $50 million within 2 years.
but only if you're willing to step out of the shadows and run it properly. Why are you telling me this? What do you want? Amelia's smile was genuine. I want to represent you. I specialize in helping founders transition from startup to scale up. And frankly, you're the most interesting case I've seen in years. A solo founder who's built a profitable platform while working full-time somewhere else, who's managed to stay completely anonymous while capturing significant market share? That's either genius or insanity, and I'm betting on genius. Over the next 2 hours, she laid out a plan. Incorporate properly under my own name. Quit TechFlow and focus on Phantom full-time. Raise a seed round to fuel growth, hire a team, move from my apartment to actual office space, stop hiding, and start building the company I dreamed of since those late nights at MIT. The only question, Amelia said as our meeting wound down, is whether you're ready to stop being invisible. I looked around the coffee shop, at the Harvard students bent over their laptops, at the professors grading papers, at the entrepreneurs probably having meetings just like ours at neighboring tables. For 3 years, I'd been building in secret, protecting myself from failure by making sure no one could witness it. But I'd also protected myself from success. What about my family? I asked quietly. When they find out what I've built? Amelia studied my face carefully. What about them? Are you building this company for their approval or because it's what you believe in? The question hit like a physical blow. I'd spent so many years defining myself in opposition to their expectations that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to want something purely for myself. For me, I said finally. I'm building it for me. Then their opinion is irrelevant, she said simply. Success is its own revenge, Elena. You don't need their approval. You just need to keep building.
6 months later, Phantom Technologies raised $3 million in Series A funding. A year after that, we raised $12 million in Series B. By my 28th birthday, the company was valued at $200 million and employed over 100 people. Forbes featured the anonymous founder on their cover with the headline, "The Invisible Revolutionary." TechCrunch called Phantom Technologies, quote, "the startup that's quietly reshaping small business commerce." And through it all, I remained anonymous. Elena Vargas, freelance web designer, still lived in a modest apartment and drove a reliable but unremarkable car. But the Phantom founder of Phantom Technologies was building something that would change how millions of small businesses connected with their customers. My family never knew. Victor continued building his traditional real estate empire, Diego climbed a corporate law ladder, and Marisol chaired her charity committees. At family gatherings, the few I still attended, they'd ask politely about my little computer business while discussing Diego's latest partnership or Victor's newest development project. I'd smile and say it was going well, thank you for asking, then listen to them plan their futures while I quietly funded mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter they'd dismissed as a dreamer had built something more valuable than everything they'd achieved combined. But the satisfaction was complicated, tinged with the sadness that came from succeeding in isolation. I'd learned to build empires in the shadows, to create value without recognition, to measure worth by impact rather than applause. What I hadn't expected was how lonely victory could be when the people you'd once wanted to impress were too blind to see what you'd accomplished. But as I sat in that courtroom years later, watching Collins mock my supposed lack of business acumen, while Amelia prepared to reveal the truth, I realized that the loneliness had been worth it. Every secret success, every anonymous triumph, every moment of building in silence had led to this, the moment when the daughter they'd called a disgrace would finally show them exactly what disgrace looked like. And it looked nothing like what they'd expected. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut when Diego arose from his seat in the gallery. My brother had been content to let Collins do the heavy lifting, but now he sensed an opportunity to deliver the killing blow himself. At 33, Diego had perfected the art of public humiliation. It was, after all, a family tradition. "Your Honor,
If I may address the court as Elena's brother and someone who has witnessed her struggles firsthand, Judge Harrison frowned. Mr. Vargas, you're not counsel in this case. I understand, Your Honor, but I believe my testimony is relevant to Mr. Collins's point about my sister's credibility and character. Collins nodded eagerly. Your Honor, Mr. Diego Vargas is a respected attorney and member of this community. His insights into the defendant's history could be invaluable. The judge reluctantly gestured for Diego to continue. I felt Amelia tense beside me, but she remained silent, her fingers drumming against her legal pad in that familiar rhythm. Diego straightened his tie, the same unconscious gesture our father made when preparing to destroy someone. Your Honor, my sister has spent her entire adult life hiding behind excuses. When our parents offered her every advantage, the best education, entry into the family business, connections that most people could only dream of, she chose instead to chase fantasies. A few spectators nodded, the kind of people who believed success was handed down like heirlooms rather than built from nothing. Elena has always preferred the easy path of victimhood over the hard work of actual achievement, Diego continued, warming to his theme. She blames our family for her failures, but the truth is simpler. She's never had the discipline or intelligence to build anything meaningful. Her so-called web design business is nothing more than a hobby that barely pays her rent. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Someone actually chuckled. The sound cut through me like glass, but I kept my face perfectly still. Years of family dinners had taught me to absorb their cruelty without flinching. The Elena I know, Diego said with false sadness, is someone who would rather file frivolous lawsuits than take responsibility for her own choices. She's been a disappointment to our family since childhood, and now she's trying to make that disappointment everyone else's problem. Collins was practically glowing with satisfaction. Victor nodded approvingly at his golden son's performance. Even Marisol managed a pained smile, as if Diego were speaking difficult truths that needed to be said. Thank you, Mr. Vargas, Collins said. Your Honor, I think this testimony speaks directly to what we're dealing with here. Someone who has spent her entire life making excuses for her failures and blaming others for her inability to succeed. The courtroom felt like it was closing in around me. 30 years of accumulated shame and rejection crystallized into the single moment where my own family had branded me a failure in front of strangers. This was their final verdict. Elena Vargas was worthless, and everyone should know it.
But then Amelia leaned close to me, her voice barely a whisper. Not yet, she said. Let them dig the hole deeper. I caught the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth, the way her eyes gleamed with anticipation. She was enjoying this. Not my humiliation, but the magnitude of the trap Collins and my family were walking into. Your Honor, Collins announced with theatrical finality, I believe we've established beyond question that Elena Vargas lacks both the means and the character to pursue legitimate claims against my clients. I again move for immediate dismissal. The gallery murmured agreement. Diego returned to his seat with the satisfied air of someone who just completed an unpleasant but necessary task. Victor's expression was almost peaceful, as if a long-time burden had finally been lifted. They thought they'd won. They thought this public execution would finally break me, force me to crawl back to them seeking forgiveness and acceptance. What they didn't realize was that their complete certainty of my worthlessness was about to become the foundation of their humiliation. Amelia rose slowly, her movements deliberate and predatory. Your Honor, she said, her voice cutting through the satisfied murmur of the crowd, I believe it's time to present the complete picture. The courtroom fell silent as Amelia reached into her briefcase and withdrew a sealed manila envelope. The weight of anticipation pressed down on everyone present. Collins leaning forward with confident curiosity, my family settling back with the satisfaction of people who believed they'd already won, the judge watching with professional interest. Your Honor,
Amelia began, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made people listen, Mr. Collins and the Vargas family have painted a very specific picture of my client, a failure. Someone without means, ambition, or the ability to contribute meaningfully to society. She broke the seal on the envelope with deliberate precision. I'd like to present evidence that may require the court to reconsider that assessment. Collins waved dismissively. Your Honor, whatever Ms. Reed thinks she can produce, the financial records are clear. Elena Vargas is not a successful businesswoman. You're absolutely right, Mr. Collins, she said with a smile that should have terrified him. Elena Vargas, freelance web designer, is not a successful businesswoman. However, Elena Maria Vargas, founder and CEO of Phantom Technologies, most certainly is. She pulled out the first document, a corporate filing with the Massachusetts Secretary of State. These incorporation documents show that Elena Maria Vargas is the sole owner of Phantom Technologies, LLC, incorporated in 2019. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Collins frowned, but his confidence remained intact. Your Honor, I'm not familiar with this company, but you should be, Amelia interrupted smoothly. She produced another document. This is Phantom Technologies' most recent valuation report, prepared by Goldman Sachs. Current estimated value, $1.2 billion. The murmur became gasps. Collins' face went pale. In the gallery, Victor's mouth fell open. Furthermore, Amelia continued, her voice gaining momentum, these bank records show that Ms. Vargas's various business accounts currently hold liquid assets exceeding $400 million. These patent filings show she holds 17 patents in e-commerce technology. And this, Forbes magazine cover, she held up the magazine with the invisible revolutionary blazoned across the front, features an interview with the anonymous founder of Phantom Technologies, an interview that, with the court's permission, Ms. Vargas is prepared to confirm she gave. The courtroom erupted. Reporters frantically scribbled notes. Spectators who'd been smirking moments before now stared in shock. Judge Harrison banged his gavel for order. Diego's face had gone ashen. His Harvard-trained legal mind was rapidly recalculating everything he thought he knew about his worthless sister. Marisol clutched her pearls, literally and figuratively. And Victor just sat there, his mouth moving soundless like a fish pulled from water. Your Honor, Collins stammered, I need time to verify these documents. They're all authenticated and notarized, Amelia said crisply. She produced another folder. These employment records show that Phantom Technologies currently employs 847 people across 12 countries. This partnership agreement shows a strategic alliance with Microsoft. And this, she pulled out a final document with a flourish, is a letter from the Small Business Administration crediting Phantom Technologies with creating over 15,000 jobs in the small business sector. Collins sank into his chair as if someone had cut his strings. The lawyer who'd spent the morning mocking Elena's lack of business acumen was staring at evidence that she'd built an empire while he was filing motions in small claims court. Your Honor, Amelia continued, I believe this establishes that my client possesses not only the means to pursue her claims, but also the business acumen to understand exactly what she's doing. The question now is whether Mr. Collins would like to revise his assessment of Ms. Vargas's character and capabilities.
But my silence never surrendered, Papa. It was preparation. And now you know what I was preparing for. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. The power dynamic that had defined the Vargas family for 3 decades had just inverted completely. The daughter they dismissed as worthless had revealed herself to be more successful than all of them combined. Victor's voice, when he finally found it, was barely a whisper. Elena, I had no idea. No, I said quietly. You didn't, because you never asked. You never wondered if there might be more to me than your disappointment. You were so certain I was a failure that you never considered the possibility you might be wrong. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Ms. Reed, I believe this new information significantly impacts the proceedings. Amelia smiled. Indeed it does, Your Honor. I believe Mr. Collins may wish to reconsider his motion for dismissal. All eyes turned to Collins, who looked like a man who just realized he'd brought a knife to a gunfight. The lawyer who'd started the day certain of easy victory now faced the humiliating prospect of explaining to his clients how he'd managed to pick a fight with a billionaire. The daughter they'd called a disgrace had just shown them what real disgrace looked like. And it looked exactly like underestimating someone whose power you'd never bothered to discover. The courthouse steps were a blur of camera flashes and shouted questions. Reporters surged forward like a tide, their voices mixing into an incomprehensible roar of excitement and disbelief. For 29 years, I'd been invisible to the world outside my family. Now, in the span of one afternoon, I'd become the story everyone wanted to tell. Miss Vargas, how long have you been hiding your success? Elena, what do you say to critics who claim you deceived your family? Can you confirm the Forbes valuation? Are you really worth over $1 billion? Amelia moved beside me like a protective shield, her hand steady on my elbow as we navigated through the crowd. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to disappear. I wasn't shrinking back or seeking shadows. The cameras that would have terrified me yesterday felt different now. Not like judgment, but like recognition. Ms. Vargas, called a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, why did you choose to remain anonymous for so long? I stopped walking. Amelia looked at me questioningly, but I nodded. It was time. Because I learned early that the things you build in silence are harder to tear down. I wanted to prove that success wasn't about the name on the door or the family you came from. It was about the value you created and the problems you solved. More flashes, more questions. But I was done answering for today. I had a company to run, employees counting on me, and a future that no longer required anyone's permission or approval. As our car pulled away from the courthouse, I caught a glimpse of my family through the tinted windows. Victor stood at the top of the steps, still looking shock-shelled, while reporters peppered him with questions about his disgraceful daughter. Diego was on his phone, probably calling his law partners to explain how the family failure had just become the family fortune. Marisol clutched her purse like armor, her perfect composure finally cracked. For a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. They'd spent so much energy maintaining their carefully constructed narrative of Elena the disappointment that they'd missed the Elena who was actually there. Their need to diminish me had blinded them to everything I'd built, everyone I'd helped, everything I'd become. Any regrets? Amelia asked as we drove through the city. I considered the question seriously. 29 years of feeling invisible. Decades of family dinners where my achievements were dismissed and my dreams mocked. A lifetime of being measured against standards designed to make me fail. No, I said finally. Their rejection taught me self-reliance. Their dismissal taught me to trust my own judgment. Their certainty that I would fail taught me that their opinion of my worth was irrelevant to my actual worth. My phone was buzzing constantly. Investors wanting meetings, tech journalists requesting interviews, business partners who'd known me only as the mysterious founder of Phantom Technologies, now eager to put a face to the name. Tomorrow, I'd return to my office, to the company I'd built, to the hundreds of employees who'd always known exactly who I was and what I was capable of.
The Elena who'd sat in that courtroom this morning, silently absorbing insults from her own family, was gone. In her place was someone who no longer needed to hide her achievements or diminish her dreams to make others comfortable. I was Elena Vargas, founder and CEO of Phantom Technologies. I was a billionaire who'd built an empire from nothing. I was someone who'd changed thousands of lives and created thousands of jobs. I was exactly who I'd always been. I just finally had permission to say it out loud.
the biggest disgrace this family had ever known had just shown them what disgrace actually looked like. It looked like underestimating someone whose power you'd been too blind to see. It looked like mistaking silence for weakness and invisibility for failure. And as our car disappeared into the evening traffic, leaving the courthouse and my family's stunned faces behind, I smiled. The void had been listening after all, and finally, it was ready to speak. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.